Dr. Rhine, if ESP really exists, what are its implications?
Well, it does really exist. It does really occur, we'd say. The implications begin with the basic fact that ESP is non-physical. It shows that there's something that man can do that extends beyond space-time. That's tremendous. That's like discovering another continent, a new world. First, take religion. Most of the world is religious. What is the greatest enemy to religion, or the greatest weakness in the position of religion? The fact that it cannot successfully refute the growing conception in the world of science that man is a wholly physical being. That is, it's the position of materialism. If religion could refute materialism, it would be in a much firmer, sounder position, because it stands on the assumption that there's something spiritual or extra-physical about man. Parapsychology establishes that in this experimental evidence of ESP and other abilities.
The forerunner of the present Rhine Research Center actually started many, many years ago, almost 80 years ago, when my father and mother first came to North Carolina with the question, was there such a thing as what we now call ESP? That word wasn't even in existence then. But they came here on that quest, and as it turned out, it developed into first a small laboratory at the Duke campus, and now we call the Rhine Research Center. And my father was a young man. He got onto a religious side of things. It sort of was from a family that had that belief system, and that was his back in the mountains in Pennsylvania. And he wanted to be a minister. And so he spent much of his adolescence reading and thinking, very serious young man, with that goal in mind.
We were members of the local church and interested. I was very interested because I was planning to go into the ministry. As I went on into the college, I found that the appeal of the sciences was so strong. I dropped the ministerial plans and swung over to the sciences, thinking that it would be much better for me to pursue the sciences in biology, get at these questions that were being solved there, seemingly so satisfying. That natural shift took place. At that time, it was a great movement.
My parents went to the University of Chicago to study plant physiology because that was a natural interest of theirs. That was what their career was going to be, and that followed real, true interests that they both had. But while they were there, they were still in the back of their mind were these big questions of life. What's the meaning of life, and is there something that people call divine, or is there anything other than just what we see in our bodies? And while they were at the University of Chicago, of course, a place like that has speakers coming in from all over the world, so they met and heard a lot of interesting things.
I was sitting talking with my favorite professor of botany, and I had a great respect for him. He said, one night when I was living on the farm at home in Ohio, the neighbors came over, a young couple, and asked me to drive them to the neighboring town where the wife's brother was living. She had had a terrible dream about him in which she saw him come home, put his horses in the stable, go up in the haymow, draw his pistol, and shoot himself. Her husband had said it was all just a nightmare. She should forget it, but she couldn't. She had seen it in this dream, of course. Well, he said, we drove over, but when we got there, we found it just as she had seen it. And the man's wife was still in the house, knew nothing of what had happened. Now, I couldn't dismiss this story by this man. From the time that I heard the story, I couldn't understand why this great botanist had been so happy with botany. I couldn't see how he could have left a problem like that. From that time on, my movements were toward finding out how you would get into a position to push this matter so that we would really know for sure whether or not such a thing as this could happen. I didn't even know where to look, but soon I found out that there was a psychical research society.
J.B. Rhine's first efforts in parapsychology were in exposing a fraudulent medium, a very, very popular medium in Boston at the time, who had a following among very, very important and powerful people. And Rhine's exposure of her drew him a lot of flack. But among this critical but visionary set of the population, it also earned him immediate respect, because he obviously cared about these questions, and yet he was able to be as critical and as hard-nosed as anyone could possibly be.
Questions like that came up that raised my father's curiosity. Well, what does this mean? That's what brought him down to Durham, North Carolina, was the final last attempt to get the answers. He did this in the form of having a manuscript in his hand, literally, that had come from John Thomas, supposedly in contact with his deceased wife. And it was so provocative, so impressive, that my father and mother felt it was worthwhile taking this manuscript down to where Professor McDougall had ended up after his year abroad, and that was at Duke University, where McDougall had just set up the first department of psychology.
When we finally came to Duke University under Professor McDougall in the Department of Psychology, all these things had accumulated a number of things to investigate. Some of them could be investigated in the laboratory.
1934 was the year that the Rhine Institute began officially. When they first began, they had numbers from 0 to 9. They would write a big number in an envelope and close the envelope and give it to a child and say, oh, tell me what number's in this envelope. They had a professor of perception named Carl Zener, and he designed 5 simple symbols, have become the famous ESP symbols, or the Zener cards. With the first results, there were enough interesting, significant results that they were pretty excited. Nothing like this had ever been done before. They were getting something which nobody could explain, and they were constantly thinking, well, what can we try? Shall we try this? Shall we try that? Probably
the most important thing that was learned was that the phenomena that were being reported in seance rooms and in spiritualist kinds of studies, which were carried out mostly under very poor conditions and with the kinds of results that can't be analyzed statistically and scientifically, really. What we found out was that underlying all of that, there was something real, that there is a capacity in people to get information without any of the known normal physical means of acquiring information. And this Rhine developed an experimental method that was modeled after methods that were used in experimental psychology at that time for studying things like learning and motivation. And he developed a very sterile, really, method for collecting data and analyzing it that demonstrated that knowledge really was being acquired when you totally controlled the access to knowledge. And that was a remarkable achievement.
You don't know anything about science. You don't know any science that comes to any grips with nature that doesn't get back to what it thinks is a physical law, physical principle. What else would it be? If you think of anything else, you'll find yourself over in parapsychology. Because parapsychology has been the study of those events that happen, or people think they happen and say they happen. Those events that happen that you can't explain by these physical things.
We began an investigation based on the claim of the gambler, that when he gets in a certain state of mind, which he calls hot, he can influence the fall of the dice. Now here we have these dice throwing results, giving evidence under very good conditions.
It seems to be a scientifically approachable phenomenon. The course of a fall of a die is being influenced measurably.
So we can say the mind does have some kind of direct connection with the world of matter in a way that dominates it.
In the 1960s, the Duke Parapsychology Laboratory actually closed its doors because my father was mandatory age of retirement from Duke University. He wasn't ready to finish his work. He wanted to take it with him. So in about 1964, he began another laboratory, just very close to the old one, but off the campus, no longer associated with Duke University.
The aim of the foundation, he said, would be non-doctrinaire, non-political, intended to be free even of philosophical bias, but by the increased illumination of reliable knowledge, this search for the truth about the nature of man, he thought, would profoundly affect those systems of belief that now prevail. In a world so full of wide-ranging claims and confusing, even conflicting doctrines and creeds, the need, he said, is for a strong, independent institution to which these great problems can be referred. Already in its short history, this small laboratory has to an extent played such a role.
The Duke Parapsychology Laboratory changed its name to the Foundation for Research on the Nature of Man when they left the Duke campus and became a separate independent organization, which is now the Rhine Research Center.
What I'm searching for is the best way to keep the growth of knowledge going about man's nature on the lines we're talking about until it is increasingly effective in making life more meaningful here on the planet, more understandable, more useful, and more pleasant. But the point is, it is going to depend on knowledge. That is the thing that strikes me as an old teacher used to sizing up and grading and examining. The thing that stands out is we don't have enough knowledge. Don't let me sound pessimistic or critical. Most of the things that we are groping for and don't quite make connections on, as mind reaches mind, bring out the fact that we don't together know enough.
The Rhine offers quite a lot to the public now. Small as we are, we really offer a tremendous amount in the way of education, both in our local weekly free open programs where people can just walk in and participate or listen and learn, from the evening programs we have twice a month, weekend workshops. We're going to get back at some point soon, we hope, to our summer school program, which is an intensive education for people, which is not provided anywhere else in this country at this present time. We also have a journal, a peer-reviewed scientific journal, which is published twice a year. That's quite an achievement to be able to do on a regular basis ever since 1937. For our own research reports and those from all over the world, it's the premier journal for the field of parapsychology.
There's a wonderful resource of knowledge and background that I can turn to and see what's been done, pull it together.
This is the Alex Tanis Research Library at the Rhine Research Center. And the volumes that we have here range from reference works to personal accounts of psychic experience or mediumship. Many of the books are out of print, so they can't readily be found anywhere else. We also have a complete set of the Journal of Parapsychology, which is published by the Rhine Research Center.
People other places around the world will hunt for months trying to find things through library loans and on the internet that I'll be able to collect in a few minutes because it's all right there in front of me.
And it's oftentimes hard with so many different sources on the internet to know what's true, what's not true. The skeptic says this, the parapsychologist says that. How do you know how to weigh one thing versus the other?
I think even for those of us who don't do that kind of research ourselves very much, we want to know that there's somebody there who can evaluate a new thing. When somebody brings in a new machine in, we want to know that the Rhine Center, if they say something works, that it does. So it's kind of like a check. You take an aspirin pill and you you hope it helps you. But behind that, you have the trust that some scientist has done the basic work. And that's the way we feel the Rhine will always be that. Whatever else there is, even with all our educational programs, we feel that the basic bottom line is our science base.
For the first time, the distinctive thing that the Duke Lab did was to bring it into mainstream academic science. And the Rhine Center has inherited that tradition. And so in the minds of a lot of people, the Rhine Center still is the gold standard for scientific credibility in this field. And because of that, in a field that's so embattled and so criticized, if people who want to take these questions seriously, when they turn and ask, well, who is really studying this in a truly scientific way? The Rhine Center still has inherited that mantle that we've done that we know how to do that, we continue to know how to do that, and we continue to set a standard for very serious scientific work.
The perspective of the Rhine has, I think, broadened from parapsychology to the realm of consciousness studies. So rather than, I think, pure scientific statistical evaluations, we're also going to be looking at more practical applications of some of these techniques.
Applications to business, to medicine, there's just unlimited range. We could help with law enforcement. That's another area which we've been looking at.
How do successful businessmen use their intuition to become successful? And for that matter, how do artists use intuition to become more creative and more productive in the work that they do? And I think on some level, we're really looking at what it is that makes human beings very successful at what they do. And some of that goes beyond the five senses.
For instance, we would go even further into seeing into the healing work and seeing how mental intention, which is measured in the PK work, can be related to our healing our own bodies or healing that of others.
Now, I think next questions are for us to ask are, so now that we know that there are abilities that people have that are beyond our understanding, just because we don't understand how they work doesn't mean we can't put them to work.
Can consciousness extend over space and time? Well, we have evidence of that. We're trying to study how it can extend. And of course, the ultimate question would be, can it extend even beyond death itself? But so in a sense, this is all part of the nature of man that my father originally envisioned.
So we're going to contribute a lot to the understanding of how conscious experience and the physical substrate of our being connects. And I'd say that's the most exciting growth area in all of the human sciences right now.
You know, how fast we solve these problems depends really on the amount of resources that the field has. It's a very difficult thing to study. It's a very challenging area. And it's one where, sort of like here in the common cold, it's a widespread, important problem that it's very hard to get a handle on. But as with a common cold, I think we need to assume that if we keep putting resources into the research, we'll come up with the answers that will benefit people.
I'd say if you put all of parapsychology in the world together right now, it's smaller than most chemistry studies going on right now out in the research triangle with the pharmaceutical industry. It's a very, very small operation involving very few people, almost all of whom are working part-time.
I think people should really give funding for this work even more than the other funding for other work, because for one thing, other people are funding. Governments are giving funding for other work. Grants through the universities and other private foundations are much more available to the traditional psychologist, botanist, engineer, whatever, than they are to our field. So we really do depend upon private donors to keep our work going. And it is important, and if private donors don't pay attention to us, then this work will disappear.
One of the best reasons to be a benefactor of this kind of work is we're really addressing some of the fundamental questions that people have asked for centuries. You know, what happens after we die? How does healing work? How is it that people seem to be mysteriously connected one to another through telepathy, through dreams, through other kinds of mysterious processes? And they're mysterious, perhaps in part because we haven't spent enough time studying them.
It's hard to accept the reality of some of these phenomena because they raise big questions about who we are and what does it all mean.
We're very, very interested in these questions, and we're very rigorous, and we're very critical. And it's those combination of things that's made us persist.
I believe that science has the capability to address those basic questions that interest humanity in a step-by-step fashion. But you can't go from down here where we are to up here where people of strong religious persuasion are in one step. If we're going to document the existence of the spirit, for instance, or some grand power in the universe that animates us and our spirit, then it's going to take many lifetimes of research done in incremental fashion, little steps to get there. But that's the business of science and good creative scientists, to design experiments that can ask the right question so that you get a clean answer, and then ask the next right question and get another clean answer, and make little steps and build upon that.
The answers we get are going to be so revolutionary and so fascinating and so important that a person could hardly make a better investment if their commitment is to understanding what our basic human nature really is. If what you're interested in is in shedding real light on what our nature is, I think you couldn't find a better place to invest your resources and your energy and your interest.